Awaken. Sleeping Beauty Retold. A Tale in the Romance, a Medieval Fairytale series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 1. In King Eric's crowded cathedral, where countless courtiers jostled each other for a glimpse of their radiant new queen, Lady Margarita of Beacon Isle, Princess Rosamond stood alone. Or as alone as a girl could be, with some lady's elbow in her midsection, and yet another baron's cape, trying to sweep her veil from her head for the dozenth time that day. Rosamond wished she could have worn her hair uncovered, like Queen Margarita did, restrained only by a crown of roses. Rosamond longed to be back outside in her own garden at home, far from this foreign kingdom, but her father, King Almos, insisted that a girl her age was old enough to be betrothed, so here she was, an unwilling guest at someone else's wedding, while she wore the gowns and veils her mother had insisted upon in order to tempt some royal younger son to ask for Rosamond's hand in marriage. Contrary to her father's wishes, Rosamond intended to keep her hands to herself for some time yet. If she could only. The herald bellowed something about presenting their respects to the new king and queen. Rosamond found herself swept along in a wave of silk-clad humanity, as the courtiers hurried to kiss the king's ass. Well, officially his hand, but if he'd turned around and presented his backside, they wouldn't have hesitated. After what felt like forever, finally the herald announced, Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Rosamond, daughter and heir of King Almos. Rosamond didn't wait for him to finish listing her father's various titles. Instead, she strode forward and bobbed a curtsy to the king and queen as two guardsmen brought forward her coronation gift for the couple, a pair of pink rosebushes that matched the shade of Rosamond's dress perfectly. Behind her, she heard the hiss of malicious whispers from men who'd bowed so low their hats fell off, and ladies who might as well have dropped to their knees when they'd curtsied. Rosamond lifted her head high, trying to ignore them. To her surprise, both King Eric and Queen Margarita rose to offer Rosamond similar courtesies. As the queen straightened, she held out her hand to Rosamond, asking the girl to sit beside her. Anything to get her out of the crush of bodies. Rosamond took the chair beside the queen happily. Where did you manage to grow such a delicate shade of pink? Queen Margarita asked her. I had an extensive rose garden in the house where I grew up, but all our roses were white. She paused to nod in acknowledgement to some courtier and his family, who prostrated themselves face down before the throne. Rosamond tried not to laugh. I am gifted with plants, she replied with no small amount of pride. When I was born, my fairy godmothers blessed me with two talents, that of healing and an affinity with plants. When my father heard of your wedding and coronation, he insisted that I bring you two of my finest roses as gifts. So here I am, and so are they. But how do you make them that color pink? Margarita asked. I asked them to make flowers the color of my newest gown, so that I might wear them in my hair, Rosamond admitted. Her father's kingdom was not as rich as that of King Eric, which was richer still with the addition of Margarita's dowry of Beacon Isle, so Rosamond had fewer jewels than most of the courtiers present that day. So you are saying it is magic? That you can speak to plants and they do your bidding? Margarita said, looking intrigued. She removed her flower crown. Here. Can you make these pink to match your gown too? Rosamond took the wreath in her hands. The roses were wilting in the hot hall, poor things. She had never tried to change the color of cut roses, only those still attached to the bush, but she could not refuse the queen's request without at least attempting to fulfill it. Rosamond concentrated on the flowers, feeling the drying sap flow sluggishly through the stems as they valiantly tried to survive just a little longer. There was no plant to talk to in the dying circlet. Sighing, Rosamond pricked her thumb on a thorn and sent a wave of healing into the twined flowers. The limp stems she touched stiffened once more, as waterfalls of wilting petals turned into perfect double crowns. Within moments the queen's coronet looked as fresh as if it had just been picked from the bush, ready formed, but they were no pinker than before. These were as white as the moon. "Oh, you have made them so beautiful!" Queen Margarita exclaimed in delight. "But I would so love them to be pink." Swaying in her seat, Rosamond concentrated harder on the flowers. Now they were healed, they should do her bidding. They should blush, just as the Queen commanded. Blush as prettily as a maid surprised as she bathed. So they would be pink as. Rosamond fainted before she could finish that thought. 2. "Mistress, you must wake and eat something," Rosamond's maid urged. Rosamond's head hurt, as it always did after she'd tried to perform magic. What sort of witch swooned whenever she cast a spell? One who shouldn't perform magic at all, her mother's voice echoed in her head. A princess and a future queen should be practicing protocol and learning all the arts of a high-born lady, so that she could be an example to her subjects. As this apparently didn't include spending long hours in the castle gardens, Rosamond had ignored her mother as much as possible. What was the point of being a queen if you couldn't do what you liked once in a while? After all, it was the king who ruled. Queens were just for decoration and doing whatever it was women did to get children. Oh, she knew it involved men and clothing was not required, but no one had been willing to tell her all the details. Her mother had promised to tell her everything on the night before her wedding. Wedding. Ugh. Rosamond didn't fancy a single one of the noblemen she'd met at King Eric's court, and she fervently hoped the feeling was mutual. She'd be happy in her ignorance until the right man came to his senses and asked for her hand. Just thinking about men made her head hurt all the more. "Bring me willow bark tea first," Rosamond ordered. "I have it here already, mistress," the maid said, sounding aggrieved. "Give it to me then." A cup touched Rosamond's lips and she gulped down the contents, barely tasting the tepid tea. "Now you must eat something," the maid insisted. Rosamond gritted her teeth. Monica had been her maid for as long as she could remember, and she swore the girl liked to boss her around as much as Rosamond's mother did. More perhaps because Monica was not much older than her mistress, and Rosamond was certain she reported everything she said to Queen Maria, Rosamond's mother. Hence why Rosamond was stuck wearing the gowns and veils her mother had insisted upon for every royal event at court. So Rosamond took the small loaf of bread Monica held out, broke off a piece and popped it into her mouth. Food helped combat the weakness she felt after casting a spell. More helpful was a visit to the palace gardens where the plants would restore her far faster, but the memory of yesterday's whispering courtiers was enough to make her wish to keep to her chambers until she was well enough to return home. Under no circumstances did she want even one of them to see her in the palace gardens, talking to the plants. It only took one to spread vicious rumors. But one vicious rumor might mean no marriage proposals too, which would be a godsend in Rosamond's eyes. And she would so love to see the roses which had provided the queen's crown. Rosamond stuffed the rest of the bread into her mouth, forgetting all propriety in her haste. With an effort, she swallowed. "Help me dress," she commanded. Monica set her hands on her hips. "Are you sure you're well enough? You've been abed, senseless for a day and 2 nights, mistress." The way Monica said it, she made mistress sound like helpless child. This wasn't new. Rosamond smiled sweetly. "I've rested plenty. Time to be up and about. Doesn't mother want me to bring a husband home?" Monica gave her a dark look, but all she said was, "If you hurry, we might make it to the tournament before it starts." A tournament? Rosamond had heard of such things, but never attended one before. With knights? And jousting? Rosamond asked eagerly. "That was yesterday," Monica said, helping Rosamond change into a fresh shift. She selected a gown the color of ripe strawberries and held it out for Rosamond to put on. "Today is the melee." Rosamond slipped her arms through the sleeves and forced herself to stand still so Monica could thread and tie the laces of her gown. "What is a melee?" I am not sure, Monica admitted, giving the laces a sharp tug so that Rosamond was left breathless. But Sir Warren has entered. Sir Warren? But who will guard me? Rosamond demanded. You have a place beside the Queen if you are well enough, said Monica. I'm sure her royal guard won't mind taking care of one more. That sounded all right to Rosamond, so she submitted to Monica's toilette with good grace as the maid dressed her hair and tucked it under a white veil. They made their way out to a field Rosamond barely recognized. Gone were the sheep that had grazed there when they'd arrived. Now it was crowded with brightly colored pavilions crowned with flags that snapped in the breeze. At one end there was tiered seating that held a crowd of courtiers. Rosamond suppressed a groan as she felt their eyes turn on her. This way, mistress, Monica said, touching Rosamond's elbow. She pointed at a stand shrouded in a purple canopy. In the shadows beneath it, Rosamond could just make out the king and queen. Rosamond took her seat beside Queen Margarita and tried to hide her surprise as Monica placed herself on the boards at Rosamond's feet. Margarita turned to Rosamond. It is good to see you better, princess. Before Rosamond could reply, the king added, she looks like a strawberry with cream on top. She'll distract the knights from combat in those colors. They'll all want to eat her up. He laughed at his own joke, as did most of the courtiers within earshot. Rosamond blushed as red as her dress. Do shut up, Eric, or the girl will return home convinced there's an ass on the throne here and her father's army will be at our gates within the week, Margarita said in a low voice so that only Rosamond and the king heard. The queen's serene smile never faltered. Now, princess, let me look at you. He is right about one thing. That color does suit you. I hope you brought a lot of favors, for all the knights will be asking for yours today. Favors? Rosamond faltered. Monica pushed a bundle of cloth into her lap with a pointed look. Is this your first tournament, princess? The queen asked. When Rosamond nodded, Margarita continued, it is mine too, but I have had both my husband and many of his knights explaining the intricacies of tournaments to me for weeks, until I agreed that all of the men would be allowed to show off in my honor. Apparently, beating each other senseless is a sign of respect to their new queen. Quite barbaric. While they waited for the day's combat to begin, Margarita regaled Rosamond with tales of yesterday's jousting. 2 horses had been killed, several knights had broken arms and legs, and one was sporting 2 black eyes so dark he'd refused to remove his helmet. Rosamond couldn't hide her shock. You mean men were hurt? All I have heard of tournaments is that they are heroic. Romantic, for knights fight for their lady loves. I had not heard that men were injured. The king heard this and laughed. Silly girl, of course men are hurt. This is good practice for battle. And just like in battle, we have physicians on hand to help set bones and the like. Rosamond felt ill, as though she would bring her breakfast back up again at the king's feet. Eric, the queen said warningly. The king opened his mouth as if to protest, and closed it again without a word and turned to face the empty field. I would like to hear more about how you choose your gowns, princess, Margarita said. First the pale pink at the coronation and now this deeper rose for today. What will you choose tomorrow? Purple? So that on the day of your departure, you wear black? Embarrassed again, Rosamond mumbled something about how her mother had chosen her gowns for this trip. Then you are very lucky. My mother would be perfectly happy to send me out naked, as long as I wore a string of pearls, Margarita declared. Rosamond couldn't help herself. She burst out laughing. Your mother would let you go out naked? Not even wearing a shift? Margarita nodded. Naked. Clothing is just a distraction, she said, when the way to catch a husband is to show him what you will bring to the marriage. If you truly wish to enchant a man, let him see you naked. I assure you, it will torment him until he finds the courage to ask for your hand so that he can see such beauty again. Rosamond doubted she would ever have the courage to do something so brazen. Not to mention that there was little chance she would ever want to enchant a man. King Eric seemed like a nice enough husband to Margarita, yet she'd called him an ass. If even the best men were donkeys, where did that leave her? Thinking to change the subject, Rosamond ventured, "I can't imagine it. You look so lovely in your gown, Your Majesty. What manner of creature grows fur in such a rich red color?" The Queen laughed. "This is not fur. It is velvet, made on a loom by a weaver who brought her knowledge of its craft from distant foreign lands. I shall make you a gift of some, if you wish it." "I do," Rosamond said fervently. Conversation ended for a little while, as a cacophony of trumpets signaled the beginning of the tournament. Two teams of knights lined up on opposite ends of a field, while a page in the king's colors set what looked like a blown-up pig's bladder in the middle of the field. Rosamond turned to the Queen to ask about the bladder, but someone blew a short blast on a trumpet, and the thunderous clatter of 24 men charging across a field toward one another drowned out any sound she made. She lost sight of the bladder amid the madmen trying to kill each other, though only armed with wooden staves. It was nothing short of brutal. She went from gasping at every blow to leaving her mouth permanently open. Rosamond tried to close her eyes, but a fresh shout or crack of bone only made her snap her eyes open again, until finally she clapped her hands over her eyes so she could only peek through her fingers. Even that limited field of vision made her sick to her stomach. All around her, people cheered and groaned as their favorite knights gained or lost some sort of victory, but Rosamond couldn't tell one mud-spattered man from another, especially with them clad head to toe in boiled leather. Finally, when she was certain she could endure no more of this violence, the king called a halt to the match. Servants stood beside the field with flagons, and the squires raced to get their knights a drink. Only then did helmets come off, and Rosamond realized she recognized one of the half-dozen men left standing as the captain of her guard, Sir Warren. The king saw him at the same time Rosamond did. "You man fights well," he said. "You should make sure he carries your favor into battle, for if he fights for one of the ladies in my court, I will do everything in my power to persuade him to stay in my service instead of your father's." Her man. Rosamond hadn't thought of the knight that way before, but now that she looked at him, she had to admit he was quite handsome. He was no simpering courtier but a brave knight who fought well. Who would fight for the woman he loved, and her honor. She sighed. So romantic. Rosamond flapped her hand to get Monica's attention. "Go to Sir Warren and give him this," she instructed, thrusting a piece of pink fabric at her maid. "Tell him he fights for his princess's honor." Monica didn't say anything. She simply took the handkerchief and made her way from the royal stand to where Sir Warren stood, drinking his cup of ale. The Queen, noticing Rosamond's preoccupation, followed her gaze. "So that's why you aren't flirting with the courtiers here. You have better men at home." Rosamond reddened. "I don't know how to flirt, Your Majesty. And even if I did..." Margarita patted her hand. "Most men won't notice anyway. They're simple creatures, really. Let him kiss you, find a way for him to glimpse you naked, and then refuse all else until you are married. Everything else is just so you can make sure he's not a complete ass, right, Eric?" The king said. His attention was on the remaining 6 men forming up on the field once more. "Yes, of course. They're about to fight again." Margarita's serene smile surfaced as she added softly to Rosamond, "And never agree to host a tourney. I swear this will be our last." The horn blasted its command for the fight to begin, and Rosamond hid behind her hands. But if she peeped between her fingers, she could still see the pink handkerchief tied to the shoulder of Sir Warren's cuirass as 6 men became 4, then 3, then 2, until he faced a single foe who was much larger than him. Their staves clacked together like practice swords, but both men wielded them like steel blades they intended to kill one another with. They circled, crossed, thrust. It looked like an elegant dance, until Warren stumbled on an uneven patch of ground and his thrust went wide. His opponent saw his chance and brought his stave down hard against Warren's sword arm. Rosamond heard the crack as Warren's arm broke, but the shouts and cheers from the stands drowned out her frantic cry. The other man lifted his wooden sword in salute to the king, turning his back on Warren. Warren still held his stave in his injured arm, but he transferred it to his other hand and assumed a fighting stance. "This is not over, I do not yield." Sir Warren roared, loud enough for even Rosamond to hear. Her heart beat rapidly in her breast. How could he be so brave when he was injured? The bigger man turned and brought his stave up slowly. He too was tired, but he wasn't as badly hurt as Warren. The dance resumed. Warren's opponent dragged one foot, as though his knee had been damaged. Warren kept his broken arm close to his body, but as far away from the other man as possible. Each time the staves knocked together, it seemed softer, as though both men lacked the strength to continue. Time ticked by. A second. An hour. An eternity. Or so it seemed to Rosamond, who longed to run out onto the field and heal her hero, but she could not until this duel was over. A collective gasp rose from the stands as the big man overbalanced and fell to his knees. Warren, in an almost leisurely movement, set the point of his stave to the man's throat. Rosamond heard wild cheering, and it took her a moment to realize the sound came from her own throat. "Do we have a winner?" King Eric boomed. Warren pulled the pink handkerchief from his cuirass and waved it above his head like a flag, as he staggered to the royal box. When he reached it, he fell to his knees. "I am the victor, your majesties," he said. "To the joy of your countrywomen. I'm sure they are glad they will be protected by an able knight like yourself for their journey home," the king replied. "Countrywomen? Oh, of course. Monica." Rosamond dismissed the maid from her mind easily. Sir Warren was the captain of the princess's guard. He would defend her with his life, before he even glanced at Monica. That was why she needed to heal him. She might be a poor witch, but he had fought for her honor and won. Rosamond rose and descended to the grass, or what had been grass before the fighting had churned it into dust. Heedless of her gown or who saw, she knelt beside her valiant knight and reached for his broken arm. Blood. She needed blood to cast a spell. There were no thorns today, so she scraped her hand along the edge of his stave until she felt the prick of a splinter. With her fingers bleeding, she touched her wounded knight, closed her eyes and concentrated on healing him. She concentrated so hard she barely noticed when the spell sent her into yet another deep swoon. 3. When Rosamond opened her eyes, she met the frightened gaze of a maidservant she did not know. The girl bobbed a curtsy, said, "I shall fetch the queen," and hurried off, leaving Rosamond alone. Alone with a tray of food at least, Rosamond noted, reaching for one of the strange orange berries. It burst like a bubble of white wine on her tongue. Eagerly, she reached for another. "So you like cloudberries too, princess?" Margarita asked as she swept into the room. "Eric says they aren't sweet enough for his liking." She reached for one and popped it into her mouth. "More for me." Suddenly awkward, Rosamond didn't know what to do. Surely she should curtsy, or offer the queen a chair. What did one do when a queen visited your bedchamber? Margarita dragged a bench from the corner to the side of Rosamond's bed, and enthroned herself on it. "Your maid tells me you are unwell and must return home. The royal physician says you should not be moved, you are so gravely ill. What say you?" Rosamond wet her lips. "I am fine, your majesty." "Are you with child?" the queen demanded. "If he refuses to marry you, I can make the man change his mind." Her smile was fierce. Rosamond shivered. "No, your majesty. I have not chosen a husband yet, and my father has not chosen one for me." Not with child and not ill, the queen said, ticking them off on her long fingers. Then whatever is the matter? My gift. The magic I was born with. It is not strong. When I try to use it, I am not strong enough either. Rosamond swallowed. At home, I only used my powers on living plants, and it was not so bad. Here, on cut flowers and on men, I am not strong enough. Margarita laughed. So what you are saying is that men are hard work while plants are not? I will agree with you there. Rosamond wasn't sure what to say to that. Queen Margarita was nothing like she'd expected. Fortunately, she was saved from finding a response by the entry of a maidservant carrying a wooden box. I have a gift for you, the queen announced, taking the box. It has been a week since my coronation and, look. She flipped open the lid and revealed the crown of roses she'd worn on her coronation day. Yet, this could not be the same crown. The roses were as fresh as if they had just been picked, instead of dried out in the summer heat, as they surely should have been. Whatever spell you cast on them, these roses will not die. They remain perfect. You are gifted with powerful magic, princess. I have little magic, but I have placed a blessing on the crown. When you take a husband, he will be loyal to you from the day you first wear this crown until the day he dies. I would advise wearing it on your wedding day. Margarita set the crown back in its box and closed the lid. Thank you, Rosamond said. She didn't have the heart to tell the queen that she didn't want any husband, loyal or otherwise. I thought you said you would give me some of that new cloth to take home, not a crown. So I did, the queen exclaimed. I forgot to ask Penelope if she has enough, or whether she must make more for you. I will send someone directly. The maidservant who'd brought the box was quickly dispatched, but the queen stayed to tell Rosamond all about the remainder of the tournament, which she'd missed. From the sound of it, that was a good thing. The melee on foot had been followed by one where the combatants rode on horseback, and Margarita sounded almost gleeful at the number of broken limbs she described in vivid detail. Rosamond's stomach roiled, making her regret breaking her fast at all. 4. 3 days Rosamond waited for the Queen's gift, while watching the crowds at court dwindle as other guests returned to their homes. When Rosamond hinted at her plans to depart too, Queen Margarita insisted that the princess's gift would be ready within the hour, but hours came and went with no sign of any cloth. Finally, Rosamond lost patience and sent Monica to find the weaver. The maid returned with a puzzled look on her face. Did you say the weaver was a woman named Penelope? Monica asked. Rosamond nodded. That's what the Queen called her. Yes. I found a Penelope. She is the Queen's own dressmaker, not just a weaver, and a noblewoman in her own right. Lady Penelope is a knight's widow and the Queen's companion. She has not been at court because her daughter is ill. Monica frowned. She says that if you are willing to come to her chambers, she will measure you for a new gown directly. I do not understand. The Queen said. Rosamond stopped. She had been the Queen's companion in place of Lady Penelope. Queen Margarita evidently did not wish to give her up until her original companion was at her side again. No matter. I shall go now. Monica led the way back to Lady Penelope's chambers, an airy apartment that was bigger than the one Rosamond had been given. Evidently the Queen's companion was held in high regard. Her Royal Highness Princess Rosamond, Monica announced. Movement in the window alcove drew Rosamond's attention as a petite, dark-haired woman climbed down from the window seat, setting down her sewing. She bobbed a curtsy. Your Highness. I'm Penelope. Queen Margarita told me you wanted a gown like her red velvet one, but when my daughter took ill, I could not leave her side. Penelope tilted her head to the side, like a curious bird. I don't think the red would suit you. Too dark. Perhaps pink or sage. She crossed the room and knelt by a chest beside a small couch that Rosamond realized was occupied. The pale girl on the couch looked perhaps 10 years old, but her skin had a waxen sheen like she was not long for this life. Rosamond's heart went out to the girl and to her poor mother. Melita fell ill so suddenly. For 3 days she unpacked the chests of cloth that arrived in port last week, exclaiming over all the new colors. And on the 4th, she could not rise from her bed. Penelope's tears spilled over and she wept into her hands. Melita looked like she would never rise again, in Rosamond's opinion. Unless she could heal the girl. Rosamond glanced around the room, looking for something sharp. She spotted a strange contraption with a wheel mounted on a low table, and a short staff with a spindle sticking up from the table. Rosamond swiped her finger across the spindle, wincing at the sting as the sharp point drew blood, then knelt beside the girl. Laying her hand on Melita's forehead, Rosamond closed her eyes. She focused first on cooling the girl's fever, then on ridding the girl's blood of the disease. As Rosamond felt her own head grow fuzzy, she released the girl and rose unsteadily to her feet. She fumbled blindly for the windowsill, then cried out as something sharp pierced her hand. Yet something about the pain cleared her vision almost instantly. Rosamond glanced down. She had grasped a briar rose growing through the window, and the thorns had bitten deep into her palm. In the back of her mind, somewhere in the memories of how her magical gifts were supposed to work, Rosamond remembered that her healing ability was linked to plants. Suppressing a second cry of pain, she wrapped her hand firmly around the flower stem, burying the thorns even more deeply, and reached for the girl with her free hand. Within moments the girl's eyes fluttered open. She coughed wetly before she murmured something that sounded like, "My Terra," and coughed again. "I am here," Lady Penelope said. The disease had settled in Melita's lungs. Rosamond felt blood trickle down her wrist, but she closed her eyes once more to focus on the girl's lungs, where fluid was making it hard for her to breathe. Rosamond concentrated, and the fluid seemed to lessen a little. Slowly at first, then more strongly, she poured what magic she had into the girl. Melita coughed again, not so thickly this time, and Rosamond took hope as she rid the girl of the disease that had plagued her. In triumph, Rosamond pushed away from the girl, panting as black spots danced before her eyes. She would not swoon today, she swore. Today, weak as she was mistress of her own magic.